Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive.
Hmm.
Today, we're plunging into a world where companies are, well, so powerful, their every move sends ripples across the market. And sometimes, those ripples lead straight to a courtroom.
Yeah, absolutely.
Think back to 2014, remember Bridgestone, the tire giant? Well, they, along with Hitachi and Mitsubishi Electric, admitted to something pretty shocking.
Mm.
They'd been secretly colluding, setting prices, dividing up the market for rubber auto parts.
And this wasn't small potatoes. We're talking over $2 billion in fines just from the U.S. government. A
Yeah.
huge amount.
$2 billion. And what's really striking, as you mentioned before we started, is that this isn't some one-off thing, right?
Oh, not at all. The Justice Department, they're constantly looking into stuff like this. We've seen similar allegations against generic drug makers, keeping prices artificially high.
I remember that.
Starkist Tuna got hit with a hefty fine for price fixing, too. And even massive names like Visa and MasterCard or U-Haul and Avis and truck rentals, they face intense scrutiny over potentially anti-competitive behavior.
So there's clearly an economic concept tying all these big headlines together. Our mission today, in this deep dive, is to unpack oligopoly.
That's the one.
And for you, the listener, whether you're cramming for an econ exam or just want to understand the hidden forces shaping the markets you interact with every day, we're going to explain it. What is an oligopoly? Why is it so common?
How do these firms strategize? What challenges do they face?
And crucially, how do regulators try to step in and protect us, the consumers? We'll break down the complex ideas, use plenty of real-world examples, stuff that's directly relevant to your studies, and frankly, just understanding the world.
Okay, let's get straight into it then. So, at its heart, an oligopoly is a market structure defined by having just a small number of producers. Simple as that. And a firm in that structure, we call it an oligopolist.
Right, so it's not like perfect competition, where you have tons of firms and none can really influence the price.
Exactly. And it's not a pure monopoly either, with just one dominant firm. It sits somewhere in between. It's a form of what economists call imperfect competition.
Imperfect competition, meaning these firms actually have some clout. They have market power, they can affect prices.
Precisely. They have significant market power.
And it's not just theory, is it? I mean, once you start looking, you see these oligopolies everywhere.
Oh, definitely. Think about search engines in the U.S. Google is dominant, obviously, but then you have Bing from Microsoft, Yahoo from Verizon Media. Together, they hold a really significant share.
Or smartphones. It feels like it's basically Apple and Samsung, right?
Pretty much dominates the landscape. Or even toothpaste, Colgate-Palmolive, Crest, Sensodyne, just a few big players.
Wireless plans too. Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, they've got most of the market locked up.
And airlines. On many domestic routes, you might only have 2 or 3 main choices.
So it's about having few competitors. But does that mean the firms themselves have to be massive global companies?
That's a great point. Not necessarily. The key factor isn't the absolute size of the firm, it's the number of effective competitors in that particular market.
Ah,
So imagine a small town with only 2 grocery stores. That's an oligopoly for the people living there, just as much as the big airlines are for, say, flights between New York and LA. The defining thing is that limited number of rivals.
okay, that makes sense. So why do they pop up so often? Why don't we just have hundreds of competitors in most industries?
Well, it often boils down to factors similar to what creates monopolies, just maybe in a slightly weaker form. Probably the biggest driver is something called increasing returns to scale.
Increasing returns to scale?
Yeah.
Meaning bigger is cheaper, essentially.
Basically, yeah. Larger producers often have significant cost advantages over smaller ones. They can buy inputs cheaper, use more efficient large-scale technology, spread fixed costs over more units.
Right.
When these advantages are strong enough, it just naturally leads to an industry where a few big firms come to dominate, rather than hundreds of tiny ones trying to compete. Think about those big grocery chains, again. Their scale gives them an edge that makes it tough for small independents to survive.
So the market structure itself kind of pushes towards fewer players. And that brings us to measuring this concentration, right? How do economists or regulators actually figure out if an industry is an oligopoly?
Right. There's a crucial tool they use, the Herfindahl-Hirschman Index, or HHI. It sounds complicated, but the idea is simple. It gives them a snapshot of how concentrated, how dominated by a few firms an industry is.
HHI. Okay, how does it work?
You take the market share of each firm in the industry, say, as a percentage. You square that percentage for every single firm. Then you just add up all those squared numbers.
Okay, squaring. Why square them?
Ah, that's the clever part. Squaring gives much more weight to the firms with larger market shares. So a firm with 50% share contributes way more to the HHI than 5 firms with 10% share each, even though the total share is the same. It really highlights the impact of dominant players.
I see. So it emphasizes the big guys. Can you give an example?
Sure, let's say you have 3 firms. One has 60% market share, another has 25%, and the last one has 15%. You calculate 60 squared, which is 3,600, plus 25 squared, 625, plus 15 squared, 225. Add those up. 3,600 plus 625 plus 225. That gives you an HHI of 4,450.
4,450. Is that high? Low? What do these numbers mean?
Good question. The U.S. Justice Department has guidelines. Generally, an HHI below 1,500 means the industry is considered unconcentrated, pretty competitive.
Okay.
Between 1,500 and 2,500 is moderately concentrated,
Mm-hmm.
but an HHI over 2,500, that's flagged as highly concentrated. That's often where you find oligopolies or even monopolies. And if a merger is proposed in an industry that's already moderately or highly concentrated, and the merger would significantly increase the HHI, regulators get very interested.
Right, they might block it.
Exactly, or demand changes. We saw this play out perfectly with that big beer merger in 2016, Anheuser-Busch InBev wanting to buy S. Miller.
Oh yeah, the Budweiser guys buying the Miller guys, essentially.
Right. Now, the U.S. beer industry, even with all the craft brewers, was already highly concentrated before the deal. The HHI was around 2,598. AB InBev had over 40% share. Miller Coors, owned by S. Miller, had nearly 25%.
So well over that 2,500 threshold. The Justice Department must have been watching closely.
They absolutely were. They only allowed the merger if S.A. Miller sold off its entire Miller Coors business in the U.S.
Ah, so they forced them to divest that part.
Correct. To ensure that AB InBev and Miller Coors remained separate competitors here. And interestingly, by 2019, partly because of that divestiture and other market shifts, the HHI for beer actually fell to 2,332.
So it dropped back into the moderately concentrated range. Wow.
Yeah, it's a really clear example of regulators using the HHI to actively manage market concentration.
Okay, so that's how we define and measure oligopoly. Now let's get into the really juicy part, the strategic game they play. Because you said they're interdependent.
Yes, interdependence is the absolute key concept here. It means one firm's decisions about price, about how much to produce, about advertising, significantly affect the profits of its rivals, and vice versa.
Like chess, you said.
Mm.
Every move triggers a potential countermove.
Precisely. Think about our 2 tire makers again, Bridgestone and Hitachi. Let's simplify and imagine they're the only 2 a duopoly.
Okay, just 2 players.
They could look at the market demand. Maybe they figure out that if they cooperate and limit their total production to, say, 60 million tires, they can sell them at $6 each and maximize their joint industry profits, maybe earning $360 million together?
So they could split that, $180 million each.
Potentially, yes. If they agree to cooperate like that to raise their joint profits, that's called collusion.
Collusion. Okay.
And the strongest, most formal kind of collusion is a cartel, where firms explicitly agree on output levels and prices. The most famous example is OPEC, the oil cartel.
Right, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries.
Exactly. But there's a crucial difference. OPEC is an agreement between governments. Cartels among private companies, like our tire makers hypothetically colluding, are illegal in the U.S. and most other places.
Illegal, okay. But even if it weren't illegal, there's a catch, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. There's a powerful built-in incentive for each firm to cheat on the agreement.
Cheat? How so?
Well, imagine Bridgestone and Hitachi agree to each produce 30 million tires to get that nice $180 million profit each. But then Bridgestone thinks, if Hitachi sticks to 30 million, what if I secretly produce 40 million?
Okay. What happens then?
The total supply goes up to 70 million tires. More supply means the price drops maybe to $5. Now, Hitachi, still producing 30 million, sees its revenue fall. But Bridgestone, selling 40 million at $5, might actually make more money, say $200 million instead of $180 million.
Ah, so by cheating, Bridgestone gains if Hitachi plays by the rules.
Exactly. That individual gain is incredibly tempting. But here's the rub.
Hitachi might be thinking the same thing.
Precisely. What if both firms give in to temptation and decide to produce 40 million tires each?
Uh-oh. Then you've got 80 million tires flooding the market.
Right. The price collapses even further, maybe down to $4. Now, each firm sells 40 million tires at $4. They only make $160 million each.
Which is less than the $180 million they would have made if they just stuck to the agreement.
Exactly. That's the paradox. By individually trying to grab a bigger slice, they end up shrinking the whole pie. This is what we mean by non-cooperative behavior. Firms acting in their own self-interest, ignoring the negative impact their actions have on their rivals' profits, and ultimately hurting themselves collectively.
Wow. So why do they do it? Why that temptation?
It comes down to something called the price effect. When a single oligopolist considers producing one more unit, they mainly worry about the fact that selling more will push the price down on their own units. They don't fully account for the price drop hurting their rivals' sales.
Okay. So the downside seems smaller to them individually than it does to the industry as a whole.
You've got it. That makes the marginal revenue for that extra unit seem higher to the individual firm than it would for a true monopolist controlling the whole market. Hence, the temptation to produce more.
Improving this kind of collusion, especially the illegal kind, must be really hard in practice.
Extremely hard. You mentioned that Monsanto case earlier. Just executives discussing prices during licensing talks was enough to trigger a Justice Department investigation, even without proof of an actual price-fixing agreement.
Right. But then you have that bizarre chocolate case.
The case against chocolate producers melts? Yeah, it's fascinating. In Canada, big names like Cadbury, Hershey, Nestle, Mars, they were fined heavily for collusion. They had admissions, evidence of secret meetings, even proof of executives handing over price hike details.
So it's like a slam dunk.
In Canada, it was. But in the U.S., a judge looked at a similar case against the exact same companies and threw it out.
Why?
The U.S. judge basically said, look, seeing prices go up around the same time isn't enough proof by itself. He argued it could just be rational competitive behavior. Maybe their costs, like cocoa, went up, so they all raised prices independently. Without hard evidence of an actual agreement, he wouldn't convict.
Wow. So the bar for proof is really high, especially in the U.S.
It really is. It shows how tricky it is for regulators, and it's a key thing for you as a student to understand when looking at antitrust law. You need that smoking gun evidence.
This whole interdependence thing, the cheating temptation,
Yeah.
it really does sound like a game.
It absolutely is. And economists actually have a whole field dedicated to studying situations like this. It's called game theory.
Game theory.
And it's the study of behavior in situations of interdependence, where the outcome or the payoff, which is usually profit for firms, depends not just on your own actions, but crucially on the actions of the other players too.
And you mentioned visualizing this.
Yeah, we often use something called a payoff matrix. It's basically a grid. Imagine for our tire companies, one axis shows Bridgestone's choices, like produce 30 million or produce 40 million, and the other axis shows Hitachi's choices.
Right.
Then in each box where those choices intersect, you write down the profits both firms would earn in that scenario. So one box might show 180 meters if they both cooperate. Another might show 200 meters, 150 meters if Bridgestone cheats and Hitachi doesn't, and so on.
So it lays out all the possible outcomes based on their joint decisions.
Exactly. It makes the interdependence crystal clear. It's a really useful tool for analysis.
And this leads to the prisoner's dilemma, right? I've heard of it.
Yes. The prisoner's dilemma is probably the most famous concept in game theory. It describes a specific type of game with a paradoxical outcome.
How does it work?
Okay, imagine two partners in crime, let's call them Thelma and Louise, are arrested. The police separate them so they can't communicate. Each one is offered a deal. If you confess and implicate your partner and she stays silent, you go free and she gets 10 years. If you both confess, you both get 5 years. If you both stay silent, we can only get you on a minor charge, so you both get 1 year.
Okay, so staying silent seems best for them collectively, only 1 year each.
Right, that's the cooperative outcome. But think about it from Thelma's perspective. Alone in her interrogation room, she doesn't know what Louise will do. If Louise stays silent, Thelma's best move is to confess, go free instead of 1 year. If Louise confesses, Thelma's still better off confessing, 5 years instead of 10.
So no matter what Louise does, confessing seems like the better option for Thelma individually.
Exactly. Confessing is her dominant strategy, and the situation is identical for Louise. So, rationally, they both confess.
And they both end up with 5 years in prison, even though they could have gotten just 1 year each if they'd both stayed silent.
That's the dilemma. Each player pursuing their own rational self-interest leads to an outcome that's worse for both of them than if they had cooperated.
And this applies to our oligopoly firms.
Directly. Bridgestone and Hitachi face the same dilemma. Cooperating, producing 30 million tires each, gives them both $180 million. But the dominant strategy, the individually rational choice, is often to cheat, produce 40 million. If they both do that, they end up with only $160 million each.
So they end up in this worse, non-cooperative outcome.
Yes, and that outcome, where each player chooses the best action for themselves given what the other players are doing, and no one has an incentive to change their strategy unilaterally, has a specific name in game theory. It's called a Nash equilibrium, named after the mathematician John Nash.
Nash equilibrium. So in the prisoner's dilemma, both confessing is the Nash equilibrium.
Correct. It's a stable outcome, even if it's not the best possible outcome for the group.
Are there real-world examples of this kind of dilemma outside of business?
Oh, absolutely. The classic example is the Cold War arms race between the US and the Soviet Union. Both countries would arguably have been better off spending less on weapons.
Right, they could have used those resources elsewhere.
But neither could trust the other. If one side stopped building weapons while the other continued, the one that stopped would be at a huge disadvantage. So the dominant strategy for both was to keep building more and more weapons, even though it led to a costly and dangerous standoff.
That's a powerful analogy. But wait, companies like Bridgestone and Hitachi aren't like Thelma and Louise getting arrested just once, right?
Yeah.
They compete against each other year after year.
Excellent point. That changes things significantly. Unlike the classic prisoner's dilemma, which is often presented as a one-shot game, oligopolists typically play a repeated game. They expect to be interacting with the same rivals for a long time.
And that makes them think differently.
Definitely. It opens the door for strategic behavior, where firms start thinking about how their actions today might influence their rivals' actions tomorrow. They're not just looking at the immediate payoff.
Okay, so how might that play out?
Well, one famous strategy in repeated games is called tit for tat.
Tit for tat, like an eye for an eye.
Sort of, but it starts cooperatively. The strategy is, first you cooperate, like producing the agreed-upon 30 million tires. Then, in every following period, you simply do whatever your rival did in the last period.
Ah, I see. So if they cooperate, you keep cooperating.
Right. You reward their good behavior.
But if they cheat on you?
Then you cheat on them in the next round. You punish their bad behavior immediately. But crucially, if they then go back to cooperating, you also go back to cooperating. It's forgiving.
That sounds pretty effective. Does it work in practice?
Studies and simulations suggest it can be very effective at fostering cooperation in repeated games. For our tire makers, cheating might offer Bridgestone a quick $20 million gain in one period. But if Hitachi retaliates using tit for tat, Bridgestone faces lower profits in the next period and potentially many periods after. The short-term gain might not be worth the long-term punishment.
So playing tit for tat could lead to more sustained cooperation, even without a formal agreement.
Exactly. And this is how we often get tacit collusion.
Tacit, meaning unspoken.
Yes. Firms limit production and raise prices in ways that increase each other's profits, but they do it without any formal, explicit, or illegal agreement. They just sort of understand the game and play strategically, perhaps using tit-for-tat logic implicitly. It's often considered the normal state in many oligopolies.
Okay, so they're not meeting in secret rooms, but they're still managing to avoid all-out price wars most of the time.
Often, yes. Now, OPEC is an interesting case study here. It is a formal cartel, but because it's governments, it's legal.
Right. How has their attempt at collusion worked out?
It's been a roller coaster. They had a huge success in the 70s, engineering major oil price spikes by cutting production. If you were to look at a chart of historical oil prices, like figure 14-5 in the source material, you'd see these dramatic peaks in 73 and 79. The axis, showing price per barrel, would shoot way up.
But it didn't last forever, did it?
No. By the mid-80s, the high prices encouraged conservation and new oil production outside of OPEC. Plus, some OPEC members started cheating on their quotas to grab revenue. The market got flooded, and prices crashed. You'd see that on the chart, too, a big drop.
So the cheating incentive struck again, even with governments.
It did. Saudi Arabia, as the biggest producer, sometimes acted as a swing producer, cutting its own output drastically to try and prop up prices, especially in the late 90s. Prices did recover significantly by the mid-2000s, reaching another peak around 2008, again, clearly visible on that hypothetical price chart.
But then what happened more recently? I remember prices getting really low again a few years ago.
You do. By late 2015, prices had plummeted again, even below $30 a barrel at one point. A huge factor was surging production from places like Russia, but the real game changer was the U.S. shale oil revolution, driven by fracking.
Shale oil, right.
Suddenly, there was this massive new source of supply from thousands of independent U.S. producers. OPEC, Even coordinating with Russia sometimes found it much harder to control prices. That sharp drop after 2014 would be very noticeable on the chart.
So is OPEC kind of finished as a dominant force?
The general consensus is that it won't regain the kind of power it had in the 70s. Yes, the rise of renewables plays a long-term role, but the immediate issue is structural. You simply can't get thousands of independent U.S. shale companies to agree to voluntarily cut production like a cartel would. The market is just fundamentally different now.
Okay, so even formal cartels struggle, and tacit collusion isn't always perfect.
Yeah.
How do governments try to manage all this, especially the illegal collusion?
That brings us squarely into the realm of antitrust policy. These are the government's efforts to prevent oligopolistic industries from becoming monopolies or acting like them through collusion. It's a major area of economic policy and law.
And this has a history in the U.S., right?
Yeah.
It wasn't always illegal.
Correct. Back in the late 19th century, actual legal cartels called trusts emerged in industries like oil, Standard Oil, railroads, sugar. They became incredibly powerful, essentially monopolies.
And people didn't like that.
Not at all. There was a huge public backlash against the power of these trusts, leading Congress to pass the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890. That act aimed to break up existing monopolies and prevent new ones from forming or colluding.
And did it work?
It led to some landmark breakups over the years. Standard Oil itself was broken up in 1911, Alcoa later, and much more recently the Bell telephone system, AT&T, in the 1980s. And today, the Justice Department and the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, still actively review proposed mergers using tools like the HHI we discuss to prevent industries from becoming too concentrated.
How does the U.S. approach compare to, say, Europe?
It's quite different in some ways. In the U.S., the FTC or Justice Department typically has to bring a case to court, and companies have significant legal avenues to defend themselves. The European Union's Competition Commission, on the other hand, has more direct power. It can investigate, rule, and impose fines itself, acting more like prosecutor, judge, and jury combined.
Does that lead to different outcomes?
Often, yes. The EU tends to impose larger fines and perhaps scrutinize behavior, especially by big tech companies like Google, even more aggressively than the U.S. has historically. Though that might be changing as U.S. regulators seem to be taking cues from the EU lately.
And you mentioned something about companies turning each other in.
Yes, the U.S. amnesty program started in the early 90s. It's quite clever from a law enforcement perspective. Basically, if you're part of a price-fixing conspiracy, the first company to confess and provide evidence against the others gets significantly reduced penalties, potentially even full amnesty.
So it creates a race to the courthouse.
Exactly. It massively increases the risk of participating in a cartel because you can never be sure one of your co-conspirators won't betray the group to save themselves. It really leverages that prisoner's dilemma logic against the conspirators themselves.
Oh, clever. Okay, so we have laws, amnesty programs, but tacit collusion still happens. Are there other things that make it difficult for firms to perfectly collude, even tacitly?
Yes, definitely. Even when firms want to cooperate quietly, several factors can get in the way and keep competition alive, pushing prices closer to competitive levels.
Like what?
Well, first, less concentration. Simply put, the more firms there are in the industry, the harder it is to coordinate, even tacitly. And if one firm cheats, its impact on everyone else is smaller, and the incentive to cheat might outweigh the fear of retaliation.
Makes sense. More players, harder to keep track.
Second, complex products and pricing. If firms sell thousands of slightly different products or have really complicated pricing schemes, discounts, rebates, it becomes incredibly difficult for rivals to monitor exactly what prices are being charged. Cheating becomes much easier to hide.
Okay, complexity makes it harder to police the unspoken agreement.
Third, differences in interests. Firms aren't identical. They might have different costs, different goals, different ideas about what a fair market share is. One firm might want high prices, another might prefer higher volume. These differing interests make it hard to settle on a single cooperative strategy that benefits everyone equally.
So they might just disagree on what the collusive price or output should even be.
Precisely. And fourth, a really important one, bargaining power of buyers. If the oligopolists sell to large, powerful customers, think Walmart negotiating with its suppliers, or big hospital chains buying medical devices, those buyers can demand lower prices.
Ow.
They can threaten to take their massive volume of business to a competitor. This forces the oligopolists to compete on price to win or keep those big contracts, undermining any tacit collusion.
Got it. So less concentration, complexity, different goals, and strong buyers all make collusion harder. What happens when tacit collusion does break down?
Then you can get a price war. This is when the unspoken understanding collapses, and firms start aggressively undercutting each other's prices. Prices can fall dramatically, sometimes even below the levels they'd be at in a simple non-cooperative Nash equilibrium, as firms try to punish rivals or drive them out of business.
Like those price wars at Christmas you hear about between Amazon and Walmart sometimes.
Exactly. Online retail really intensified price competition because it's so easy to compare prices instantly. Amazon often led with low prices, but Walmart fought back hard, especially using things like discounts for in-store pickup. It forces them to compete fiercely on price, which is generally good for consumers, at least in the short term.
But presumably firms don't like price wars. They hurt profits.
Generally, no, they try to avoid them. That's why they often resort to other forms of competition. One big strategy is product differentiation.
Making your product seem different.
Yes, trying to convince buyers that your product is distinct and superior, even if the underlying differences are small. Think iPhones versus Samsung Galaxies. They compete intensely, but partly by emphasizing unique features, design, or ecosystem, not just lowest price. Or brand name drugs versus generics. The chemical might be identical, but branding creates perceived difference.
So it softens direct price competition because people might prefer one brand over another, even if it costs a bit more.
Exactly. Another tactic is price leadership. Here, one firm, usually the largest or most dominant, takes the lead in setting prices, and other firms just quietly follow suit. General Motors used to play this role in the U.S. auto industry for many years. It avoids explicit collusion, but achieves a similar result.
Kind of like tacit collusion, but with a designated leader.
Sort of, yes. And finally, there's non-price competition. This is huge in many oligopolies. Instead of cutting prices, firms compete intensely through advertising, marketing campaigns, adding features, improving service, R&D. Think about the cola wars or fast food advertising. They're constantly battling for market share, just not primarily by slashing prices.
Competing on everything but price?
Pretty much. It's rivalry, but channeled into other dimensions.
And just to circle back on how complex proving collusion is, that Virgin Atlantic British Airways case is wild.
It really is. The allegation was they conspired on fuel surcharges as oil prices rose. Their surcharges did seem to track each other very closely.
And Virgin blew the whistle for immunity?
Yes, leading to BA facing huge fines and potential jail time for executives. But then,
The defense argued just talking wasn't proof.
essentially, yes. They argued that sharing information wasn't necessarily a criminal conspiracy, and that the U.S. amnesty system might even encourage companies to confess prematurely just to get immunity. The judge eventually agreed there wasn't enough proof of an actual conspiracy, and even threatened to take away Virgin's immunity.
Wow. It just shows how murky these waters can be.
Absolutely. It highlights the difference between suspicious parallel behavior, which might just be rational responses in an interdependent market, and actual illegal agreement. Proving the latter is tough.
So wrapping this all up, why does understanding oligopoly matter so much for, someone listening to this?
Because while economists use models like perfect competition as a starting point, oligopoly is arguably the market structure you encounter most often in your daily life. The phone you use, the internet service provider, the gas you buy, the groceries, the flights. So many key industries are dominated by just a few players.
So it's not some obscure corner of economics. It's central to how modern economies actually work.
Exactly. And economists, while acknowledging that analyzing oligopoly is complex, there isn't one single simple model like there is for perfect competition or monopoly take a pragmatic approach. Understanding the dynamics of interdependence, collusion, tacit or explicit, the limits to collusion, and non-price competition is crucial for grasping real-world issues like antitrust policy, merger analysis, and why some industries see price wars while others see endless advertising battles.
And often, those limits to collusion you mentioned, the complexity, the buyer power, the incentive to cheat, they do keep prices from reaching full monopoly levels, right?
In many cases, yes. The competition, even if imperfect, still provides some benefit to consumers compared to a pure monopoly. But recognizing when oligopoly dynamics are dominant and how these firms are likely to behave is absolutely key.
So the big takeaway for you, the listener, is to start noticing these things. When you see just a few big companies competing, think about the strategies they might be using.
Are they subtly signaling prices? Are they differentiating their products like crazy? Are they locked in an advertising arms race? Is there a hint of a price war brewing?
Understanding this framework gives you a powerful lens to analyze the markets around you, whether it's for your econ class, your exams, or just being a smarter, more informed consumer and citizen.
Absolutely. And with that, we wrap up another deep dive into the fascinating world of economics. Thank you for diving deep with us today. We really hope this summary gives you a solid grasp of oligopoly for your studies and beyond.
From all of us at Last Minute Lecture, thank you for listening.